The ambassador started his distinguished diplomatic career in 1977 as Counselor of Foreign Affairs in Rabat, and then that same year started a 7-year posting as First Counselor, Deputy Chief of Missions at the Embassy of Morocco in Rome. In 1985, the ambassador served as Minister Plenipotentiary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation back in Rabat. But then the very next year, he was selected to be Morocco's ambassador to Angola, which is where Camille was born, correct? A post he held for 7 years. Starting in 1993, he served for 6 years as Morocco's ambassador to Portugal. From 1999 until 2002, His Excellency served as Morocco's ambassador to Italy, Malta, Albania, and the Sovereign Order of Malta. And then he was selected to take his current post as ambassador of His Majesty to the United States of America. He's been active in international organizations throughout his years of diplomatic service, including being the independent chairman of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, the permanent representative of Morocco to the International Bureau for Information Technology, and the chairman of the Africa Group of the United Nations organizations in Rome. The ambassador is a prolific writer and is also a frequent speaker at international conferences and seminars. His decorations include the Grand Cross of the Order of Merit of Portugal, the Grand Cross of the Military Order of Christ Portugal, and the Grand Cross of the Order of Merit of Italy. We are truly delighted and honored that the ambassador could join us this evening, and he is joined at our table with his lovely wife Felice and his son Camille. So, Ambassador, we welcome you to the conference and to the podium.
Thank you, Professor Sideman. It's a real pleasure to be here at Duke for the first time, doing something a little bit more serious than what I've been doing in the last few years, because I have a son who's a Duke, and usually I come here with his mother to furnish his apartment or his. so today I'm going to do something a little bit more serious than that. But thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure. My friend Hussein Hassouna, the ambassador of the Arab League, called me and told me that he was going to ask you to invite me, and I said I would be delighted, and here I am. I'm quite impressed by the people who are here tonight, and I hope I will give some information that you don't know. But what I would like, Professor, you asked me to talk about the relations between Morocco and the United States, and what Morocco is doing in terms of combating terrorism. First of all, I don't know how many of you who know Morocco, have been to Morocco, have an idea of what Morocco is. I have a gentleman who was sitting next to me who was in Morocco a few years ago and lived in Morocco for a year. Morocco has changed a lot since then. And then we're talking about the 60s. Well, very quickly, what Morocco is. Morocco is a very old country. In the region, in our region, Northern Africa, Morocco is, let's say, the only country that has been around forever. The modern Morocco was founded in 790, and I'm calling it modern Morocco, Muslim Morocco. And went on with several dynasties with a long history, shrinking, widening, becoming bigger, becoming smaller. But the country has always been there, and the capitals of Morocco go back to the 8th century, like Fez, and Marrakesh to the 11th century, and Meknes, 16th century. But all these, so that shows that Morocco has been around for a long time, and that's important to know. Morocco was, in 1912, and now I'm going to jump, and then I'll go back, but I'm going to jump to the beginning of the 20th century. So Morocco has always been around. The very important thing to know is that Morocco was the only country in the region, in the Arab world, that was not under the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire stopped at the borders between Algeria and Morocco, and that is also very important because it shows why Morocco has a different culture, a different cuisine, different way of dressing, and a different system, political system. So the Ottomans stopped at the borders with Morocco in the 16th century. Then Morocco had, in the 16th century, Morocco had to fight the Portuguese, because the Portuguese, it was the times of the expansion of Portugal, and the King of Portugal came to try to conquer Morocco in the late 16th century, and there was a very famous battle called the Battle of the Three Kings, or the Battle of Alcácer Quibir, where the Portuguese were defeated, and Portugal lost its independence to Spain because it had been defeated by the Moroccan king at that time. And why I'm saying that, because from then on, Morocco was considered as an invincible and very powerful country until 1850, when the French came to Algeria in 1830, and in 1850 there was a Battle of Isfi, where the Moroccans went to help the Algerians, and they were defeated by the French. And it's important because this is when Morocco appeared for what it was at that time, quite a weak country, not the invincible country that people thought it was for the last 2 centuries. But Morocco was the last country to be occupied by the Europeans, the expansion of the European colonialism. And the King of Morocco had to sign with France and Spain the Protectorate Treaty in 1912. So between 1912 and 1956, Morocco kept, the symbols of its independence. We had the king, we had the Moroccan government, but really who was governing the country were the French and the Spaniards in the north and the south. Of course, that was the arrival of the French and the Spaniards was a terrible thing for the Moroccans, and they started to fight for independence until we recovered our independence in 1956. Big difference with most of the other countries. The monarchy and the royal family was very much involved in the fight for independence, and the elite, the Moroccan elite, was very much involved in the fight, in the struggle for independence. So after independence, we kept our monarchy, which was very important, and we kept our elite, and this is why the country remained much more stable and didn't move to choices that most of the countries of the region went to, like socialism, like one-party system, and also that makes a big difference between Morocco and most of the other countries of the region. We are the only country actually that has had always a multi-party system, and that's important also to talk about this because it leads to where we are today. We recovered our independence in 1956. We had our first real constitution in 1962, but basically the royal palace, in the beginning, let's say that the power was spread between the royal palace and the political parties who had fought for independence, but and there was a struggle for power, but at the end the royal palace took most of the power, and the king had most of the power, and that lasted until the, let's say, the end of the 90s. But we never had a one-party system, and we always have had a multi-party system. The parties were genuine parties coming from the national movement, and so they had an existence and they had the basis. This is important because most of the countries, as I was saying, didn't have a multi-party system, and they tried to create, when they tried and they talked about democratization, they tried to create parties, and democracy didn't work because you don't just create out of the blue political parties. In 1998, the King of Morocco, King Hassan II, called the leader of the Socialist Party, who had been in the opposition, to lead the government, to be the prime minister. And there was a coalition of most of the parties who had been in the opposition for 30 years, were leading who formed the government. Then King Hassan died in 1999. His son, King Mohammed VI, became king. He was at that time, 99, he was 36 years old. And his first speech was, I'm going to continue the democratization that my father started. I'm going to address human rights, and I'm going to address women's rights. And if we look at what has happened in the last 10 years of his reign, I think we can say that he delivered. He delivered in terms of continuing the democratization of the country. The first elections under his reign were in 2002 and were considered as completely free, fair, and transparent by the political parties in Morocco and by the international observers. It was the first time in the modern history of Morocco that the elections were completely free, fair, and transparent. The king also addressed the issue of human rights, and we have here many eminent professors dealing with human rights. He appointed a commission called Equity and Reconciliation, that looked back at what had happened in terms of violations of human rights in the last 50 years. Morocco went through difficult times, and especially because we were in a very difficult neighborhood. It was the time where monarchies were always under threat. Morocco was pretty much on the west side during the Cold War, and there were always attempts of revolution within the country, and of course that led to problems of human rights and violations of human rights. This commission was led, that the king appointed, was led by several ex-political prisoners, and it was very interesting. They came up with the results. They organized public hearings, and they decided, they came up with a report, and everybody who had suffered the violations of human rights was compensated, received indemnifications, and I think that the country, the state, the government gave something like $200 million of indemnifications to all those who had suffered of abuses of human rights during the last 50 years. And when we say that, abuses of human rights, of course, it can go from people who were put in jail, people who had persons of their families killed, but also someone who was just kept in custody beyond the legal time of custody. Legal time of custody is 48 hours in Morocco. If you were kept 1 hour more, you had to be compensated. And the commission came up with the recommendations, and the king asked the commission to make public these recommendations. This means that he endorsed the recommendations, and the recommendations are basically to change the laws, and the new education of the law enforcement system, the judiciary, and everything. So I think we went through something very important. Only countries like Chile, South Africa, and very few others went through that kind of process. With the big difference in Morocco is that in Morocco we didn't change regime. It's the regime that took responsibility of what had happened during the last 50 years. The third thing that was important is women's rights. We had in the last 50 years a lot of empowerment of women. You had women ministers, women ambassadors, women entrepreneurs, but at home they were not considered as adults. There was an imbalance in what was called the family law. And there was a huge debate between those who wanted a change in family law to bring it more balance between men and women, and those who didn't want. And the king again appointed a commission with lawyers and representatives of women organizations, and especially religious scholars. And they came up with three proposals, and three proposals were one conservative, one in the middle, and the third one very progressive, and the king chose the most progressive one. But what was very interesting is that in front of all the changes, there was a verse of the Quran or a teaching of the Prophet, and that shows that there is no contradiction between Islam and equality between men and women. So this is what has happened in terms of changes in Morocco, and it's going on. Freedom of speech. The press has never been as free as it is today, and we are the only country in the region where the press is so free. The economy has been doing pretty well in the last 4 or 5 years, and we have had an average of 5% economical growth, which is quite good, and especially during the times of crisis. And we're doing pretty well in the economy. We have a lot of challenges still. We have problems of poverty, and one of the challenges is to if you go to Morocco, you will see the first world and the third world living side by side, and the big challenge is how bringing up and how to pull up those who are living in the third world to the first world. And those are the Millennium Goals, and Morocco will be one of the very few countries that will comply with the Millennium Goals by 2015. And that's very important. Millennium Goals are how you address issues of poverty, of education, of those problems. We still have, if you travel to Morocco, you will see a lot of poverty. We still have problems of education, but we are addressing all these issues. And we have to, first of all, because that's good governance, but also if you don't do it, well, the country will be in danger. And this is where I will go to the relations between Morocco and the United States, and will address the problems of terrorism and instability in our country, in our region, and internationally. Relations between Morocco and the United States. The first thing that the litany that the Moroccan always serves an American when he meets an American is to tell him that, or tell her that Morocco was the first country to recognize the United States. 1777. We were the first, before France, before anybody else. The oldest treaty that the United States have with the country, still in force, is with Morocco, signed in 1786. And the oldest building owned by the United States of America, outside of America, is in Morocco. It was given by the King of Morocco to the United States in 1820. It's the American legation in Tangier. Beautiful, beautiful house. So we've been together for a long time, long time. We, of course, during the beginning of the 20th century, since we were occupied by France, we were under the French. Let's say the foreign affairs were led by France, and the defense was led by France. So it was a parenthesis in our relations. But then in 1956, when we recovered our independence very quickly, Morocco decided that we were going to be on the west side of the Cold War and not on the east side of the Cold War. And we were among the very few countries in that case. Because if you look at all the Arab countries, most of the African countries, they were pretty much on the Soviet side of the Cold War. So the Cold War finishes in 19, but we kept good relations with Russia, as you did, by the way, with the Soviet Union, and but we seriously were pretty much on the other side. And I can give you an American ambassador told me that there was a place in Morocco where if there was to be a nuclear war, that was during the Cold War, where the president and the vice president of the United States would go. It was in Morocco, not in the United States. So that was very interesting. So after the end of the Cold War, we had to fight new dangers, and the new dangers were, of course, terrorism. Everybody thinks that terrorism started with September 11, 2001, where there were more problems before. And we worked before with the United States very closely on the problems of Al-Qaeda. And seriously also in Afghanistan before September 11th. Not going to give you classified information, especially because I don't know that. But I know that it happened, and this is recognized if you ask people in the intelligence committee or the CIA or anybody, they will tell you what exactly had happened between Morocco and the United States in terms of fighting terrorism and destabilization. One of the big questions today is that where are the dangers coming from? Where is the crisis coming from? Well, if you look around, it's basically from the Muslim world. And one of the questions is why. But no one has given an answer. But it's where it is. The United States had September 11, and Morocco was the first country. Within 3 days, we had a huge memorial at the Cathedral of Rabat in solidarity with the United States, where all the religions were represented. By the way, Morocco is a Muslim country. 99% of the Moroccans are Muslims, and we always had an important Jewish community in Morocco. So we had those two communities, but of course the Jewish community is a minority, and today it's even more in minority because many of them left and went to Israel, Canada, United States, or France, but they kept very strong links with Morocco, and there we have a very important Moroccan Jewish diaspora around the world. So Morocco is a Muslim country, 99.99%. The king is the commander of the faithful, and the king is also descendant of the prophet. So he has also a religious role. We have seen in the beginning of the 90s something different, something happening in the country. Morocco has always had what is called a moderate Islam, meaning that it's not the Wahhabi Islam that everybody has heard of. It's not a completely closed interpretation of Islam. It's a much more open interpretation of Islam. And it's a tolerant Islam, let's say respectful Islam of all the differences. And it's basically, it's an open Islam. And we have seen at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, some new teachings, some new people, some new things coming from the Middle East, especially the Wahhabi and more Orthodox Islam. And when you go to orthodoxy, you are very close to extremism. And that was one of the biggest dangers. So we had to address that issue. And when I say that it leads to extremism, well, in 2003 we suffered our first attack, terrorist attack, in 2003 in Casablanca. 42 people died because a bunch of young people blew themselves up. And then we had other attacks in Casablanca, just people who blew themselves up without killing anybody. But we were in danger. So we had to address this issue of terrorism. And today, every 6 months, every 9 months, the Ministry of Interior says that it had dismantled a terrorist cell. So we have to be very careful. But if you go to Morocco, you will see that the country is very, very stable. And it's so stable that it attracts a lot of investments. And you see a lot of foreign investments, domestic investments. We have seen a lot going on recently because the country is very safe and very stable. When I say very safe, it's important. I always give a figure. In Morocco, I think if you stretch the numbers, you have something like 15 homicides a year in a population of 32 million people. That's not very high if you compare it to other countries and other places. But still, we have the danger of terrorism. So how did we address that? We could have gone into a completely security-oriented reaction. It was the beginning of democratization and opening up in Morocco. And we could have said, well, this is too dangerous. Let's shut down everything. Let's put more security. Well, the king made a speech after the terrorist attacks of 2003. He said, we're not going to do that. We're going to continue to pursue our democratization, because that's the only way. Give people the ability to speak up, and to express themselves. And it's not through security that you're going to solve the problem of terrorism. That was one of, so continue the opening up and democratization of the country, because we think that when people have the ability to express themselves, they don't need to go underground. And that's very important. The second thing, of course, is education and giving hope to people, giving people a stake in the society. And this is what we did. We tried to improve our education system, but the education system is one of the big challenges that we have in Morocco, because we still have a high rate of illiteracy, we have a high rate of dropouts, while the government is spending 30% of its budget in education. So that's one of the challenges. We also addressed the religious field. We reorganized completely the religious field. In the beginning of the 90s, before when I was a kid, when nobody could speak about religion. Only religious scholars who had been through 14 years of studies could speak about religion. In the beginning of the 90s, people, just because they had read 3 pages of the Quran, were saying that they were imams, and they started giving fatwas and explaining what Islam is. Well, we had to put an end to that. How did we do that? First of all, by teaching the real Islam, how we see it, by reorganizing the council of the ulemas, the religious scholars, and they are the only ones who can say anything about Islam. And we have a national council and then provincial and regional councils. We have decided also that only them can say something and give an interpretation of Islam. The sermons in the mosques, because we have seen that there were sermons, violent sermons in the mosques, and we decided that sermons had to be screened at the Ministry of Religious Affairs before they were said in the mosques on the Fridays. We created interactive televisions where people could call and have answers, and that was to counter the TV channels coming from the Middle East, pushing for a more violent and more intolerant Islam. And of course, fighting exclusion and marginalization. One of the problems, as I was saying, you have the first world, you have the third world, you have people who are really wealthy and rich, and you have people who had nothing. So we launched something called the National Initiative for Human Development. And that initiative was to target the poorest places in the country, within the cities, but also in the regions. And it paid off, because the rate of poverty, the number of people living under the soil of poverty in Morocco was 15% 5 years ago. Today it's 9%. So we have some results. And that's one of the ways to address extremism. Regional threats. So this is what we have been doing in the country. So opening up in terms of politics, opening up in terms of freedom of expression, of freedom of speech, opening up in education, reorganizing the religious field, and trying to empower people and give them hope, and have less and less people marginalized in the country. So this is what we have done internally. Internationally, we have been working with the United States and with all the countries around the world, because everybody is under threat. We have seen the bombs in Madrid, bombs in London, bombs in every Arab world. Most of the people who have been killed by those extremists were Muslims. And that's important to know. What is also important to know is that very often when we arrived here, my wife and myself and Camille, people were used to tell us, well, you know, the Arab leaders and the religious leaders do not speak against terrorism. I was saying it's absolutely untrue. Everybody, every leader, Arab or Muslim leader, spoke against terrorism because we are the first ones to be threatened. Because what do these people want? They want to take power in our countries. They're not going to take power here in the United States or in Europe, but they wanted to take power here in our countries. So every Muslim and Arab leader spoke against terrorism. The only thing is that the press didn't project that, didn't say it. For instance, when we had the terrorist attacks, first of all, when September 11 happened, the memorial that happened in Rabat was the first one. It was a very important one. It was interreligious. Nobody knew about it here in the United States. The press didn't report it. After the terrorist attacks in 2003 in Morocco, we had the biggest march in the world, 2 million people, organized by the civil society, nothing to do with the government, saying, don't touch, the logo was, the slogans were, don't touch my country. And because a Jewish club had been targeted, there was a slogan saying, Jews, citizens, Islamists, assassins. So 2 million people. No newspaper in the United States reported that. So this is just to say how we have these problems perception. Now let me talk about what's going on in the region. And we were talking about the big dangers that we have today in the world. What are the big? I think that the biggest danger today in the world is weak and failed states. And we are seeing that in our region. Why? Because it's the place where the Al-Qaedas or the traffickers can blossom. And this is what's happening in West Africa. This is what's happening in the Sahel region. Today we are seeing Al-Qaeda, what is called Al-Qaeda Maghreb, flourishing in the Algerian desert, in the Sahel, Mali, Niger, today Senegal, and other places. We are seeing, everybody speaks about piracy in the east coast of Africa. Today we're talking, there is piracy on the west coast. Nobody talks about that, but it's happening. But the most dangerous is that you have Al-Qaeda, and now we are seeing drug traffickers, narco traffickers coming from Latin America, the Mexicans and the Colombians, coming to West Africa to have a new route to Europe. And that's the biggest danger, because you will have a connection between Al-Qaeda, drug traffickers, and human trafficking, because you have illegal migration going from sub-Saharan Africa to Europe, and very often crossing through Morocco. Today it's much more difficult, but this is what's happening. And when we talk about illegal migration is in the hands of mafias. So you have an interconnection of mafias, of illegal migration. You have the Mexicans and the Colombians coming from Latin America and settling in weak countries, because when you have a weak country and you don't have a state, you have problems to deal with these people. They cannot fight them, and there is so much money that immediately every corruption spreads around. And you have Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda will have a connection will be funded by this trafficking. And you will have what I call the Farkization of the Sahel region and all that region south of Morocco, but Morocco, Algeria, Niger, Mali, Senegal, Mauritania, and especially the West African countries. Guinea-Bissau, they killed the president. They have had several coups d'etats. The drug traffickers were there, and we are seeing Guinea. So how do we address this problem? Well, I think that the only way is to have a strong cooperation between all the countries of the region with the United States and Europe. And this is what we have today. The United States created an initiative called the Trans-Saharan Initiative, and that's an important initiative. But we need more than that. What we need is a full cooperation between the countries of the region. Unfortunately, it's not working. Morocco proposed a few years ago, in 1888, the creation of the Maghreb Arab Union, which had Mauritania, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. Well, it's not working. We're proposing to the countries of the region to work together in security matters, because it's very important. We have to exchange information. We have to fight together all these threats. It's not working because, let's say, the relations between Morocco and Algeria are not very good. But we are telling the Algerians that we have to overcome those problems, and we have to work together, because otherwise we're not going to defeat. The others will be stronger than us. Today, Al-Qaeda represents around 200 people, 300 people in the region. It's not much. It can become very, very quickly. It can, flourish. Look what's happening in Yemen. Look at what's happening in Somalia. Somalia is no man's land. Everything is happening there. Al-Qaeda is moving from Afghanistan, North Pakistan. They're moving to Yemen. They're moving to Somalia. So I think that the only solution is to work together and to help the weakest countries in the region, like who do not have the means, to help them, because they will not do it. They will not be able to overcome those threats. And by the way, if we have a regional integration in terms of security, we will have a regional integration in terms of economy. And if we have the economy, we will have a bigger economy, all of us together, and we will be much better partners for the United States and for Europe. And this leads me to talk very quickly about what has been going on between the United States and Morocco in the last 10 years. We have signed a free trade agreement. That's very important. We were the second Arab country to sign a free trade agreement with the United States. We have an MCA. The aid from the United States to Morocco was $8 million, I think, in 2002. Today, there is an MCA Millennium Challenge account of $700 million, which is important. And of course, we work together on the military, on terrorism. But there is still a lot to do in terms of exchanges. Morocco has had a very important relations with Europe because we are 8 miles from Europe. We just signed an advanced status with Europe, which means that we are almost as if we were in Europe, but we are not in the institutions. But that means that we have the same values and we have the same standards in terms of freedom of speech, democratization, and opening and economy. So I think I'm going to stop here. You have an idea of what Morocco is, what are the challenges, relations between the United States and Morocco, and Europe and Morocco, and I'll be delighted to answer to your questions if you have any.
Do we have any questions for the ambassador?
I have a question. The first panel that we had this morning talked about the dangers of radicalization of Islamic youth. I'm curious as to your views as to what the United States can do to try to counter that. I mean, obviously, we have a limited ability to deal with it. What could we do productively to try to prevent youth in Arab countries from being attracted to this kind of violent Islamist ideology?
I think the United States and the United States cannot do much. The United States can support these countries in terms of development, in terms of technical support. But I think it's the countries themselves who have to address the issue. How? First of all, by teaching Islam the right way. Second, giving hope and giving these young people a stake in their own societies. But the most important is to teach Islam, the real Islam as it is, because this interpretation, this very narrow interpretation of Islam, which leads to extremism, is something pretty new. It didn't exist before, and I think it exists today because there is a crisis, and the crisis in the Muslim world is the crisis that you can see in every society when a society changes, when you have huge changes in societies. You can. One day I was in a panel presenting a book of a friend of mine. His name is Akbar Ahmed, and he went around the Muslim world just to see what was going on. And it came to me the idea that Well, look at what happened, for instance, in the late 19th century in Europe. You had a lot of terrorism. You had a lot of terrorism because you had huge changes in the society. But even closer, look at what happened in Germany and in Italy and in France in the late 60s and beginning of the 70s, and even in Japan, the Baader-Meinhof, the Red Brigades. It was because there were changes in the societies, and you have tectonic movements and people react. So I think that this is what we're living in the Muslim world. I think that it's a lot about teaching Islam. There is people are going back to religion like everywhere else, like here in the United States. Religion is becoming more and more important, but it has to be the right religion. We have seen here in the United States a whole movement of fundamentalism growing in the 70s and in the 80s and 90s. It's moving back, but this is what we have in the Muslim world. I think the only way is to teach Islam as it should be taught, and secondly, to give a stake to every young man and young woman in their societies.
Another question?
Yes.
Mr. Ambassador, could you speak a little bit about the Israeli-Palestinian problem? It seems to be that they seem to blame, many people seem to blame the Israelis, but I've lived in that area, and it seems to me that Palestinians are just as, or more guilty of fomenting the problem.
Well, that's the Israeli-Palestinian issue is a big it's a big problem. I think it's many people believe that it's the core. Let's say it is what feeds the problems around the world, especially in the Muslim world. I think that it has to be solved. I think that the Palestinians, the Israelis, the Palestinians need an independent state as quick as possible within viable borders. I think that's very important for Israel, and it's very important for Palestine, for the Palestinians. I'm one of those who believe that very quickly, if there are two states, very quickly they will become completely interlinked, and they will develop together. But you cannot keep the situation. I mean, the situation as it is highly explosive, and it cannot last. I think that the strong part here is Israel, and I think since Israel is the strong part in this Israeli-Palestinian problem, I think that Israel has to help the creation of a Palestinian state and help the Palestinians to create a Palestinian state. I don't think that the two sides should sit across the table. I think that they should be part of the same team and really, really build together a Palestinian state. It's the only solution. It has to happen as quickly as possible for the sake, of course, of Israel, but for the sake and for the benefit of the Palestinians, but also for the security and safety of Israel. Yes, sir.
Ambassador, how about the situation in Europe? We discussed this morning a little bit the perhaps greater difficulties that Muslims have had to assimilate in European society, maybe even in comparison to the U.S. And what advice do you offer to European governments in terms of dealing with that tension?
Europeans dealt very badly with their immigration, which is completely different from the United States for several reasons. First of all, the United States is an immigration country, and it's a much bigger country. There is a lot of space. That's my wife's argument, but she's Italian. I think that they dealt very, very poorly with immigration. Today, in Germany, of the three generations, a young man or a young woman whose grandparents came from Turkey is still called a Turk. She doesn't speak Turkish. She has no connections with Turkey, but they still call her a Turk. The biggest mistake was made when these immigrants came in the 60s. By the way, they were called because they needed these people from North Africa, in France, in Germany, in Belgium, in Holland, for the economical development after the war. The big mistake was to create ghettos. You cannot. What you want, if you want to integrate people, you have to spread them within the society. You cannot have a majority of Maghrebis or Moroccans in a school. The immigration in Italy was started much later than in other countries in Northern Europe, and we had a Moroccan. When I was ambassador there, we had 300,000 Moroccans in Italy, and we had the biggest immigrant community in Italy. And I used to travel and meet with the mayors. And one day I went to a little city in central Italy, and the mayor was very happy because his population had increased, had grown up. I said, "How did you do that?" He said, "Because I have Moroccans." I said, "Great." But so he said that he wanted to give housing to these immigrants, and I told him, "Look, you have to make sure that these Moroccans will be a minority wherever they live. I mean, they would, the children. You don't want a school with 99% of Moroccans. You want these Moroccans to become Italians, and you will not have problems, because otherwise you will have the problems that you have in in France, in Germany, or in England. In England, it's the typical separation. The English live their lives, the Pakistani live their lives, and how can you have an interaction between the people? You want a complete interaction between the people, and that you can. Here in the United States, you have a wonderful example. I always quote two people I know very well. One of them is Elias Zeroni. Elias Zeroni was the head of the NIH. Came here when he was 23 years old. He was a medical doctor, and he made a career. His career in research at Johns Hopkins, and his wife, both of them he had $300 in his pocket. He became the Director General of the NIH under George Bush. He was appointed in 2002. Another gentleman coming from Cambodia, I met with him in a dinner, and he introduced himself as the alternate ambassador of the United States to the United Nations. And I asked him what was his story, and he said that he had come to the United States in 1979, and he was a special advisor to President Bush 41 at the White House with full clearance. So that's America. It's not the United States, it's not Europe. And I think that the Europeans should really, really deal with that problem, because otherwise you have, it's a fringe, it's not the majority, because the majority is pretty well integrated today, but still you have people are looked down, even if they studied the same school, and this creates a lot of frustration, and they make them easy praise for people, extremists who are coming to hire them coming from the Middle East and elsewhere. Extremists came to Morocco through Europe. Interesting. It was not homegrown.
Time for
BJ.
I was wondering if you've sensed any change on the ground among ordinary Moroccans and their perception of the United States since the last presidential election in the U.S.
Yes. Well, first of all, of course, President Obama was very popular. I think that the Moroccans voted for Obama, so, like everywhere else in the world. I think there was a poll recently, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, about how the Moroccans view the United States. Well, it's not still up there. It's still under the 50s, 40%, something like that. It was interesting to see during the Bush administration, we had a poll in Morocco, and really the rates were very, very low. That was in 2003, I think. But suddenly in 2005, we've seen an amazing increase in the popularity of the United States in Morocco. Why? still the embassy the embassy of the United States in Morocco and our embassy is trying to understand why. So I think it goes by ups and downs. But I think that what this administration is trying to do is to show that the United States want to be part of the international community, especially at the United Nations. The United States want to be a real part of the United Nations, and that's a policy. Well, let's see what it gives.
Ambassador, we thank you again very much for coming tonight, for your comments, and for answering our questions. And as a small token of our appreciation,
Thank you,
sir,
Professor. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.